Okay, so a little bit of necessary backstory. I recently moved to the city from a small town. I know it's pretty much the most cliche thing I could have done. I suppose I just thought the change in scenery would somehow help me grow as a person. That getting away from everyone who knows who I am would somehow help me find who I really am. It seemed like the right choice at the time. I mean, it's got to be a cliche for a reason, right? Now I realise that it's just left me up the creek without a paddle, or even a leg to stand on. But I suppose there's not much I can do about it at this point. I'm not going to tell you which city I'm talking about, just a heads up. I don't believe it's particularly important for the story. Plus, I'm not particularly keen on the idea of sharing my location with strangers on the internet. I've made enough mistakes lately, and I don't plan on adding any more. Enough about that though. So, as you might expect with moving somewhere new, there are plenty of problems that cropped up throughout the entire process. I was more or less able to plan for most of them. I had visited the city a few times throughout the move in order to meet with my landlord and take care of other busy work. While I was too busy to do much exploring or socializing, I had more or less familiarized myself with the area of the city I would be living in, at least. With that, and the assistance of the internet of course, I found myself well equipped to handle the move smoothly enough. There was one issue that I managed to overlook though, and that was the noise. You see, while I had visited the city a few times, I had never actually stayed overnight until my first evening in the new apartment. As such, I had no sense for how loud a city could be in the middle of the night. On top of that, the area that I moved into in particular had a rather active nightlife and was home to several very popular nightclubs. It was often the case that the streets were still bustling past midnight and even into the early morning. This would have been an issue for anyone, of course, but it was even more so for me, since I was an incredibly light sleeper. I maybe could have just moved to a different area. Looking back on it now, I somewhat regret the fact that I didn't. However, money was tight enough already following the initial move, and I wasn't eager to add on to that burden. I could have made do, but I was too stubborn to give in that easily. As such, I set about finding a way to deal with the noise. I tried a few different things, but eventually settled on a pair of decent noise-cancelling headphones and some background noise/music to help drown out the din from outside. It worked relatively well, though I did need a bit of time to get used to it. I had trouble sleeping occasionally in the dead silence of my hometown, so trying to sleep in a literal sea of sound was a bit difficult to adjust to. At first, I cycled through a couple different options of what to play in the headphones, searching whatever audio would work the best for me. Regular music didn't work too well for me. The song changes every few minutes were a bit jarring, and the vocals were too distracting. I tried out some background noise like rain or wind, but it didn't quite do a good enough job of drowning out the outside noise. White noise did a pretty good job of drowning out the outside noise, but something about it made me incredibly tense, and I couldn't relax while listening to it. Eventually, I ended up settling on those lo-fi hip-hop livestreams/playlists you can find on YouTube. I found the music incredibly relaxing, and since the streams ran 24/7, I never had to worry about it turning off on me. It wasn't perfect, and I still had the occasional difficulties falling asleep, but it was manageable. Everything changed though, when I found this one peculiar stream. I switched around the streams I listened to occasionally, trying to keep things fresh. I found that a lot of them end up looping the same music after a while, so I'd eventually get tired of them if I used the same stream for too long. It's become a bit of a trend lately, so I didn't exactly have a shortage of streams and playlists to choose from. The quality wasn't exactly consistent through the board, so it was a rather hit and miss process, but I'd come across a few diamonds in the rough every now and then, some of which would often have surprisingly low view counts. This particular stream seemed to be one of those. At any point in time, there were only 3 to 5 people watching, and none of them ever seemed to talk in chat. The channel only had about 10 subscribers or so, and only a couple hundred views. Barely anyone seemed to have seen the stream before, and it was only after an hour or so of idle digging that I happened to stumble across it. The quality of the music itself, though, was absolutely remarkable. The songs were all interesting, unique, and by artists I've never heard of before. Once I found it, I knew I had to give trying to fall asleep to it a try, and that very night, I did just that. And I fell asleep immediately. That barely ever happens for me. I woke up that morning feeling the most rested I've ever been in my entire life. I was astonished. Was it just a fluke? Or was the stream the cause? Needless to say, I tried it again the next night, and once again, I slept great. I started listening to nothing but that stream, and night after night, I kept having some of the best sleeps of my life. Work was going great. I was finally beginning to settle in and feel comfortable in my new home in the city. Everything seemed to finally be going just how I wanted it to. If it wasn't for my stupid cat, I may have just gone on like that forever, never realizing what was going on. I woke up that night to the sound of breaking glass and the pitter-patter of little feet on my hardwood floor. It took me a moment to realize what had happened, disoriented as I emerged from a very deep sleep. Slowly, my tired mind began to process what had happened. I remembered the glass I had foolishly forgotten on my counter and realized that my cat had likely knocked it over. Sighing, I sat up in my bed, surprised that the sound had even woken me up. It was then that I noticed that the headphones had slipped from over my ears. Before I found the livestream, this was an issue I regularly had to deal with. They would slip off as I slept, and it wouldn't be long afterwards that I would wake up, even if just enough to groan and slide them back into place. I hadn't had that happen in the weeks since I started listening to the livestream, at least not that I'd noticed. I'm not sure why this night was different. I suppose I just got lucky, if you can call it that. I was moving to take the headphones the rest of the way off of my head when I noticed something odd. There was no music coming out of them. I pulled them back over my ears to check. Nope, no music. I thought at first I might have pulled the cord loose from my laptop in my sleep, or something like that. But then I did hear something. Not music, but a strange female voice whispering in a language I didn't understand. I had no idea what she was saying, but something about her tone made me feel uncomfortable. It was the sort of tone one might have if they were describing the anatomy of an insect. Cold, mechanical, and maybe even a bit of disgust. Uneasy, I turned to face my laptop, which lay open on my bedside table, the screen facing me. It was still open to the live stream, but the stream itself was different. It had the same title and the same number of viewers, 5 including me. However, the calming looped video of waves crashing soundlessly against the cliff was gone. Instead, the video was now completely black. It wasn't a still image though, or at least it didn't feel like one. It was a shifting sort of darkness that almost seemed to quiver, if that makes any sense. Looking at it was like looking into the inky depths of the ocean at night, certain something is lurking beneath the waves, but not being able to see it. I couldn't stand to look at it too long, quickly averting my eyes. It was then that I saw the chat. Where it had once sat completely empty and unused, Now, it was moving quickly. Multiple messages being sent every second. It seemed that each of the 4 other people watching were rapidly chatting with each other at a breakneck pace. The messages were in a language I couldn't read, but if I had to guess, I'd say they were maybe in Russian. When I leaned in closer to see if I could decipher anything, the messages changed. They started all repeating the same message to each other over and over again. As this started, the viewer count began to drop one by one until there were only 2 people watching, me and someone else. It was when I realized that my webcam was on, however, that the stream went completely offline. Now, I'm not sure what to make of any of this, but I'm scared. If I had to guess, I'd say that this has been happening every night since I started watching. I don't know if it was meant for me. I'm pretty sure either way that I've stumbled upon something I was never meant to see. I may not know what it is that I've found, but I can't shake the feeling that this isn't the end of it. The stream hasn't come back online since, and the account that was running the stream has been deleted. Try as I might, I can't seem to find any sort of information on what the stream might have been, or on anyone else experiencing anything familiar. I've taped over my webcam now. I feel a bit silly for not having done it sooner, honestly. It's not like I ever used the thing. However, in spite of that, I can't seem to shake the feeling of being watched. I'm sure this paranoia of mine would have worn off eventually, and the whole experience of mine would just fade into memory as like other weird things I've seen on the internet. However, there is one simple fact that keeps me from simply letting go. I can't stop myself from sleeping anymore, no matter what I try. No matter where I am or who I'm with, once night falls, I'll soon be waking up in my bed the next morning with no memory of how I'd gotten there. It's not just a simple matter of wandering home and passing out though. I think I've been sleepwalking too. I've woken up to stuff in my apartment having been moved into strange places, like having all the furniture pushed into a corner, for example. I'm certain that I've left the apartment in this state as well, though I have no idea where I've been going. I've got no idea what to do about any of this, honestly, and I have nowhere to turn. Everyone who knows and cares about me is hundreds of miles away. I'm alone here, so I've turned once more to the internet for help. Please, has anyone ever experienced anything like this? Does anyone know anything about what's happening to me? Does anyone know what's going to happen to me? I've heard a lot of conspiracies about the Everglades city earthquake. Florida is tectonically stable. That's true. The government was testing a superweapon. That's not true. Still, I admit that most of the theories play off legitimately peculiar facts and murky circumstances. The government was doing something there before the quake. There was an oddly quick response and developed evacuation plan from the National Guard, and there was very little mainstream coverage of the disaster. Conspiracy theorists descended upon these facts like wolves fighting over scraps. But you know what I don't see mentioned in the internet forums? You know what never gets brought up in those late night 4chan threads? The injury count. I see the list of fatalities all the same. 53 men, women and children, all wiped from the earth. 53 deaths. 0 injuries. Ask yourself how that happens. How could dozens of people be killed by falling debris in car accidents and not a single one be treated for serious medical issue? They either got out unscathed or they died. I know how. I was in Everglades City 2 days before the incident. I'm going to sound insane, crazier than the conspiracy theorists, but this is true. I was 18 years old. My parents wanted a romantic cruise to kick off their post-child rearing years, and even though I wasn't quite out of their hands, they figured it wasn't worth waiting until I went to college. So I got dumped at my grandma's cabin in the middle of nowhere, Florida, for all of June and most of July. I wasn't too bummed, because the swamps around the house were perfect for catching fish and observing alligators, and I had my own little raft. It got a bit lonely sometimes, because Everglades City was 25 minutes away with a population of about 300 people. All quiet, church-going busybodies too, and no woman under the age of 30. Shame. But I had my notebook, tackle box, and adventurous spirit, a combination that kept me going. It was June 15th when the trees first shifted. My grandma actually noticed it first. "Lloyd, does something about the backyard seem off to you?" I didn't even glance up from my cereal. "No, Grandma." But when I walked out the back door, fishing rod in hand, something was definitely wrong. It took me a second, but then I registered what had happened. The thin, twisted pines that grew in the woods behind my grandma's place were about 5 feet closer to the house. All of them. From what I could see, the tree line had shifted for all of our neighbours too, thousands of feet down the road. The dirt in between the house and the trees was raised, like the entire ground near the trees were pushed towards the house. It was hardly noticeable without inspection, just enough to really unnerve me, like the forest was advancing upon us. I continued on my way, noting that the shift in the trees seemed to be about 50 feet wide, and there was a small ditch where the earth had moved apart. After I'd left the dry ground behind and began happily fishing, I forgot about the trees. But when I grounded my raft and walked back to my grandma's house for the night, I felt the ground shake. Briefly. Barely. But it shook. The days passed like that for about 2 weeks. I'd wake up, look at the stretch of land as I walked into the woods, and ignore the occasional tremors. That wide stretch of ground continued to move closer to the house, and the gap between the shifting land and the rest of the woods continued to grow. The chasm became so wide that I had to put several planks across it as a bridge. One day, July 2nd, if I remember correctly, I was out on my raft fishing a large, open area of the swamp. The water in this area was surprisingly clear, and I tried tempting several large bass to grab my lure. I nearly dropped my rod when I heard it. A resonating groan, so deep I felt it vibrating the water around me. It boiled up from the land and hung in the air, a low rumble that made my hair stand on end. It stopped after a minute, and after 5, the birds and insects started to sing again. I sat, stunned in my raft, before leaning over the edge to glare down at the smooth, flat bottom of the pond. "What the hell is going on down there?" I whispered to myself. That question wasn't truly answered for a while, but I got a few hints. Oddly enough, they came from a local drunk. I was walking out of church on Sunday, July 7th, when I heard a few grumbles by devout ladies about that man over there. I turned to look at a hunched figure against the church wall. He was mumbling about the apocalypse, saying stereotypical catchphrases like, "The end is near," I felt a little bad for him, but prepared to continue with my day. That's when I heard him say, "The ground won't stop moving." Curious, I walked over to him. "What did you just say?" Nothing, man," he stammered. "I was gonna leave. I ain't doing nothing." "Relax, what did you say about the ground moving?" He slurred his words. "Listen, boy, there's things out in the swamps, all sorts of things. They talk about alligator men. There ain't no alligator men, but there's gar people, men with the faces of gar and scales in their bodies." I remember thinking that the man was clearly insane. I turned and walked back to my concerned grandma. From behind me, I heard him say it. "There's giants buried there." The rumbling continued throughout the next week, after which the forest always became silent for several minutes. I lost sleep, staring at my ceiling, wondering what was out there. My memory around one incident is hazy. It might have been a dream, but I recall going into the kitchen around 2 a.m. one night and seeing the ground in the backyard swell, as in the entire portion that had been inching towards the house. It slowly expanded upwards and then fell back. After several nights of being unable to sleep, I decided to go out and fish at midnight. It wasn't my brightest idea, but I had to get out of that creaking house, where the forest crept up on me and the ground shook my bed, even if that meant going into the swamp. I'd always felt more comfortable on the water, so I grabbed a flashlight and my gear and headed out into the woods. I felt a definite slant when I walked over the planks. The shifting ground had moved upwards over time, that was for sure. It took me more than the usual 10 minutes to reach my raft, moored at the edge of the clear, still expanse of water. As I paddled into the middle of the lake, I noticed two things. First, that the moon was very bright. A large, luminous orb that made the bottom of the lake as visible as my hands. And second, that the swamp was absolutely silent. No frogs creaked, no cicadas buzzed, nothing. I felt uneasy. It was never this quiet. The water was never this still. The pond was never this clear. I began to turn back, and in doing so, looked at the bottom of the pond. In the smooth silt to my left, there was a crease, a deep wrinkle that stretched under my raft. The realization hit me. The greyish bottom of the pond was not silt or mud or stone. It was mottled and too unbroken by natural features like rocks. It was skin. And then the crease opened into an enormous eye. It was easily 25 feet across, gold except for the monstrous, horizontal pupils. That black pit seized me with terror, and I couldn't move as it slid back and forth. It must have seen my raft floating above it, and for a second, I thought I was about to die. But then, the mottled skin gradually pulled back together. The moon illuminated the golden bands of the iris and sunk into the black hole of the terrifying pupil until that vast eyelid drifted shut. I didn't move for an hour. It was only when my raft bumped against the shore that I found the courage to leap out of it and run home. I waited until 6 a.m. to beg my grandmother to drive far away, and we drove up to my parents' house in Kentucky for the rest of the summer. Mere days after our departure, the Everglades city earthquake occurred, killing 53 and injuring 0. I don't know about the people in the government, but I'm the only regular civilian who ever saw that thing and lived. I don't know what its body looked like. Maybe it had tentacles, maybe it was a monstrous worm. Damn, it might even have been a humanoid. I don't know. But it was miles long. There's a lot I don't know. But there's one thing I never want to know. Even though the question rings in my head every night. How many more of these things exist? To be honest, Paul, not his name, is more of a friend of a friend. I met him at a birthday party. We were introduced by our mutual friend, Jacob, and I don't remember how the topic came up, but Jacob, who had been drinking a little, told me that Paul had the, quote, craziest story ever, and insisted that Paul had to share it with me. So Paul did. I later asked Paul if I could share his story, and he agreed so long as I didn't use his name or tell what city and state he lived in at the time. Paul was working as an insurance claims guy, and occasionally had to work late. One night, Paul comes home to his apartment, opens the door, and there it is. A tooth laying right in the middle of the floor. No blood, just a molar sitting on the tile. It's got a crack down the side. He isn't sure if it's humans, because it could be a pig's tooth since they can look similar and there are pig farms in the state. Paul knows his neighbour has a cat, so he asks her if the cat could have gotten into his apartment and left a present. The neighbour says maybe, though she doesn't think the cat has done anything like that before. Paul can't figure out a better explanation, so he throws the tooth away and shrugs it off as a weird story to tell his friends. A week later, Paul comes home from work. He walks in, and there on the counter is another tooth, but this one is an incisor, and it's bloody, freshly bloody. There is no way this tooth isn't human, so Paul calls the cops. They show up, look at the tooth, and ask questions. They start suspecting Paul, but after they confirm his alibi, they quit bugging him, take the tooth, and leave. Evidently, the cat had an alibi this time too. It looks like someone has broken into his apartment, so Paul goes and stays with his parents for a few nights. The cops eventually call. They've tested the DNA from the tooth, but it doesn't match anything on file, so they can't ID who the tooth is from. It's been a few days, so they tell Paul it should be safe to go back to his apartment. They'll even drive by a few times during the night. Paul agrees, but before returning, he goes out and buys an alarm system, a bunch of security cameras, and a gun. Paul spends the entire day getting the alarm system and cameras up and running, and researching how to use a gun before passing out. The next morning, he wakes up and realizes he's pretty stinky, so he goes to the bathroom and starts the shower. He gets in, grabs the bar of soap to wash his body, and there it is. A tooth sticking out of the soap. A thin trail of blood dripping onto the shower floor. Paul is, understandably, freaked out. He calls the cops over. The alarm hasn't been tripped, and they all watch the footage from the security cameras, but there's nothing. They ask if Paul set everything up correctly, and he shows them that he has. The cops don't know what to tell him. One of them even jokes that it looks like the Tooth Fairy has a new hobby. The cops agree to stake out his apartment that night. In the meantime, Paul takes the cameras to a shop to see if they've been messed with. They've got to be, right? But The lady at the shop can't find any evidence of tampering. She tells him the cameras are working perfectly. Paul doesn't sleep a wink that night. He told me he never left the gun out of his sight. It's an anxious night, but the cops are outside. Nothing happens. Next morning, an exhausted Paul finally gives up on trying to sleep and gets out of bed. He puts on a robe, heads to the kitchen, and starts pouring himself a bowl of Cheerios. Plink! He looks down. Sure enough, staring back at him in the middle of a pile of cereal is an unmistakable human tooth with a copper filling, and is much bloodier than the first two. Even some of the Cheerios have stained flecks of dark red. Paul is about to have a nervous breakdown right there. He's just holding this bowl in his shaking hands and his mind is racing. He's installed the cameras, he's got an alarm system, the cops are outside. How the hell is someone getting these teeth into his apartment? And as he looks down at this tooth in his cereal bowl, that's when it hits Paul. No one has been sneaking in during the last few days. The blood on the tooth and cereal is too dry. The teeth have been in his apartment since before he installed the cameras. Paul has been living with human teeth hidden around him for days. He immediately calls the cops over and tells them his theory, adding that the blood from the soap was probably dried too, but the shower had re-wetted it. So he and the cops all started combing through the apartment looking for human teeth like some sort of sick Easter egg hunt. They found 23 in total. They were hidden in some pretty obscure places. Paul says the ones he remembers most were hidden in a pair of socks, one in a jar of salsa, one taped to the top side of the blade of the fan in his room, and one jammed into the opening of a tube of toothpaste he hadn't opened yet. The most disconcerting part was when they found 5 particularly bloody teeth stuck into the wall behind his dresser like tacks, with a lopsided, pen-drawn pentagram connecting them all. They even found the first tooth, the cracked one that Paul had thrown away, hidden in a chess set. Whoever had broken in had gone through Paul's garbage and retrieved it. So, since Paul's apartment is now a crime scene, he has to go back to staying with his folks for what will probably be the foreseeable future. He's with them a week and nothing happens. One night, while still staying with his folks, Paul goes to take out the garbage. He's just closed the lid when, out of the corner of his eye, Paul thinks he sees movement towards the end of the yard. So he turns his head to look. There's a figure standing right next to the shed. It's too dark to tell who it is, but Paul can see the silhouette. "Who's there?" Paul calls out, and the figure starts booking it straight towards Paul. Unfortunately for this figure, Paul is a bit more than cautious after finding a total of 26 teeth planted in his apartment. For the last week, in every spare moment, even when taking out the garbage, Paul has been carrying the gun he bought, and Paul has been practicing. So Paul shoots the figure. The figure cries out and drops to the ground. Paul's folks hear the gunshot and turn on the outside lights before rushing out. There's a guy on the ground, moaning and clutching his arm where Paul had nailed him. Paul gets closer, gun drawn, and next to the guy on the ground, Paul sees that the guy has dropped something he had been holding. A pair of pliers. Paul doesn't have a lot of time to think about that though, because after a moment, Paul realizes that he knows the guy. It's a guy that Paul's company insures. Remember how I mentioned Paul works in insurance? Evidently, the guy had gotten into a wreck and then went to the office Paul worked at, demanding a check. There was a dashcam showing that this guy had been completely at fault. Paul described it as reckless driving, but the guy kept insisting, denying any responsibility. He was lying through his teeth, Paul said. So Paul, who had been the case manager, denied the claim. Paul says that the guy hadn't been very happy about that. So the cops come and arrest the guy. As Paul later finds out, he had been arrested in 2011 for the disappearance of a woman, but he denied it and was released when there wasn't enough evidence. He was arrested again in 2013 for the disappearance of his girlfriend, but again denied it and was again released due to a lack of evidence. Neither woman had been seen since. The guy was charged and went to trial for assault. Only assault. Nobody could prove that he had been the one to break in and hide all the teeth in Paul's apartment. The guy denied it. When asked about the pliers, he said he was going to use them to break into Paul's parents' house. Now, I don't know much about breaking into places, but I'm not sure how much pliers would help. The guy even tried to press charges against Paul for unlawful force. He said Paul belonged in jail for shooting him. Thankfully, the judge threw that out pretty quickly. All the courts could get him for was assault and attempted burglary. He served his time, and after a year and a half, he was released on parole. A month later, he failed to report to his parole officer. The authorities are still looking for him. Paul moved to another state and changed his name. When they later tested the 26 teeth found in Paul's apartment, they discovered that they were not from one person. Evidently, they had come from at least 9 different individuals. Dad, Mum won't get out of the bath. My 8-year-old son Lucas informed me with relative calmness as he came downstairs for breakfast. Oh? I raised an eyebrow in curiosity. An odd statement, I thought, but he didn't seem distressed. It was more like he was making an offhanded comment. Yeah, she's just in there. I think she's asleep again, he explained as he sat down at the table with an exasperated huff. I could tell the poor kid was fed up, and I couldn't blame him. His mother, my heavenly wife, was known to pull stunts like this. She suffers from bipolar disorder, and when she doesn't take her medication and comes down from a high, she comes down hard, which takes its toll on all of us. It gets difficult to explain why Mommy doesn't want to come downstairs, or why she's always the one to make an embarrassing scene at school events without upsetting the kids, but I do the best I can. Now, while I do love her endlessly, I also have to admit that it's tiring to deal with, and since it's not uncommon for her to pick a part of the house and refuse to move from it for days on end, I wasn't really concerned either. The only unusual thing is that she would usually choose the bed or the couch as a spot. You know, somewhere comfortable. Though I guess I wouldn't put it past her to decide on the bathtub either. Alright, thanks for letting me know, champ. I'll go get her. You just eat your breakfast and keep an eye on Lucy for me, okay? I instructed and gestured to where his little sister sat on a high chair, mashing food around a bowl. Okay, he answered simply. He was pretty used to looking after her when my wife wouldn't, and when I wasn't home. If I'm honest, I always felt a twinge of guilt over it, but there was little I could do. I made my way upstairs to our bathroom, to where I could hear my wife singing. Well, more humming really, from the bathroom. It wasn't a tune I knew, though it was melodic and had a hauntingly beautiful quality to it. I smiled softly to myself hearing her. Of course she was singing. Maybe she was having a good day after all. Upon reaching the bathroom, I knocked lightly on the door before opening it, and she answered cheerfully. Come in. Hey, Pumpkin, what are you doing? I asked cautiously, unsure that I really wanted to know the answer as I examined the scene before me. There were bottles of various soaps thrown all around, their contents strewn about the walls and ceiling, creating a mosaic splat of goo, and the bath mat seemed to be missing from the room entirely. The towel rack hung broken beside the bathtub, where it had smashed the tiles as it fell, which, in turn, meant that there were tile shards and sprinkles of plaster coating the floor. All this chaos while my wife sat in the tub quite happily. She smiled up at me as she rested against the back of the tub with the torso and head out of the water. She was, naturally, also completely naked, except for a drenched towel that covered her lower half. "I'm a mermaid now," she announced proudly, and flopped her legs around under the towel as if they were joined. "Ah, I can see that," I agreed as I caught on that she'd probably placed the towel there to represent her mermaid tail. "Do you want to join me? You can be a merman. It'll be so much fun," she tried to coax me. "I mean, it sounds good, but don't you want to come down and see Lucas and Lucy? I bet they'd love to see you," I suggested, gently trying to convince her. "No," she said firmly, and then continued in a sweet voice. "I don't want to. I can see them later. Just come play. The water is really nice," my wife insisted. I gave a small sigh, rubbing my hand over my face. "Anya, sweetheart, have you been taking your medicine?" I asked, as neutrally as I could. With my question, her smile quickly turned to a scowl, and she sneered. "You don't believe me. You never know how to have any fun anymore. You're so closed off. You're always trying to put me down. Go away. I don't want you in here. Go away," she shouted, thrashing and splashing water at me as she screamed. She was making quite a ruckus, and I was worried the neighbours might hear, so I backed out of the room respectfully. I could tell that she obviously hadn't been taking her medications, and that nothing I could say was going to get through to her while she was in this state. So I made the decision that I would get Lucas off to school and call my parents to see if they could watch over the kids for a couple of days while I dealt with her mood. Thankfully, my parents were more than happy to look after their grandchildren, and, judging by the looks in their faces when they came to pick up Lucas and Lucy, they probably understood that the reason they were needed was related to Anya. With the kids gone, I spent the entire rest of the day trying to convince my wife to come out of the bath. For the most part, she ignored my pleading and instead just continued to sing to herself, even going as far as to get louder when I would try to speak. In a way, her humming was useful. Since I could hear it from anywhere in the house, it meant that I could move about fairly freely and still know that she was okay in the tub. When I thought she'd calmed down a bit, I attempted to talk to her again. "Anya, I made you some food. Do you want to give it a go?" I asked softly as I carefully re-entered the room. She ignored my question and my presence at first, folding her arms and continuing to hum, so I prompted again. "It's your favourite. Salmon with garlic and ginger." This at least got a response. She turned to me slightly and then growled. "I'm a mermaid. I can't eat fish. Are you crazy?" she yelled again, and I realised my mistake. "Oh yeah, right. Sorry." I apologised quickly and removed the dinner from her sight. After that, I resolved to try another tactic. "Honey, don't you want to get out in a moment so we can change the water? It's getting cold by now, isn't it?" "I don't care. I like it cold," she answered bluntly, leaving me dumbfounded. I never considered that she'd actually want to stay in cold water. Out of other ideas, I settled on turning up the heating in the home in hopes of keeping her warm, and left her to splash about and sing to herself. The following day, I came to check on her early. I knew she was still okay because she was still singing, but I wasn't prepared for the odor that would hit me when I came into the room. I realized fairly quickly that she had relieved herself in the bathtub rather than leave the water, and the stench was enough to make me gag. At this point, I resorted to begging her to get out of the bath, at least to allow me to change the water, but she outrightly refused. When I tried to remove her forcefully, she kicked, scratched, and even bit me, making it impossible for me to get her out. So, in the filth she remained, she called it the essence of a mermaid. I can say without any guilt that I was ready to give up then and there. Now, I know this part will sound stupid of me, but I just want you to know that everything ended up fine and that the smell was too much for any man to endure. So, I left her alone for 10 minutes while I raced down to the store to buy some air fresheners. If she wasn't going to let me get rid of the putrid water, I at least hoped that she would allow me to hang air fresheners around the place. When I returned, as I said, she was fine, still happily humming to herself as she marinated in squalor, and I was quick to hang up the air purifiers. Her smell was by now perforating the house. It's a wonder the neighbors didn't get a whiff. I fell asleep that night inadvertently from exhaustion while listening to a melody and breathing in the sweet, calming scent of vanilla. When I woke the next morning, I rushed to check on her. I'd forgotten about her when I fell asleep, and panic gripped me. I raced to the bathroom and found, to my relief, that she was still generally alright. Her skin was getting a little blotchy from the cold, despite having the room heated, and when I touched her, I was horrified with some of the skin that had slopped off. Yelping in surprise, I recoiled, but she didn't seem to mind. "It's okay. I have to lose my human skin to become a full mermaid," she assured me with an unsettling smile. "Oh, of course, yeah," I quickly agreed, not wanting to send her into another rage. Honestly, I thought if she moved about too much, like she might if she got mad and started thrashing, that all her skin would fall off her limbs like a cheap costume. It was in those moments that I decided enough was enough. I couldn't continue the gentle, wait for her to come out of it approach anymore. I decided to call in her psychiatrist, Samantha. It was my hope that she'd be able to convince my wife to get out of the tub, and once I'd explained the urgency of the situation, she agreed to come over as soon as she could. I paced back and forth as I waited and met her anxiously at the door. When I opened it, wafting aromas of feces and vanilla hit her square in the face, and she scrunched her nose. "I know, I'm sorry. It's Anya. I tried to mask it," I apologized quickly. "Where is she?" she asked with a nod of understanding. "Upstairs. First door on your left. Can't miss it. Just follow the singing," I instructed. Samantha gave me a strange look when I said this. Her expression was somewhere between confusion and uncertainty, though she didn't say anything else as she headed upstairs to find my wife. She probably didn't believe me. It did sound a little outlandish, if I'm honest with myself, and I trailed her anxiously. It's fair to say, the days past had really taken their toll on me, and I was by now little more than a nervous wreck. But I wanted to be there when Samantha confronted my wife about her delusions. When we reached the bathroom, Samantha pushed the door open slowly and softly called my wife's name. The seconds after passed tensely as she received no response, and I saw her eyes grow wide as she covered her mouth with a trembling hand. I could tell she was entering shock. "I know, maybe I shouldn't have left it this long to call you, but she was insisting on staying in the tub. Can you help her?" I confessed and asked uncertainly. Help her?" she stammered, turning to me, her expression relaying both disbelief and horror. I could see that behind her eyes, her thoughts were travelling at 1,000,000 miles an hour as she tried to catch up to what she was seeing, and something in her mannerisms got to me, and I began to panic. My heart began to thump heavily inside my chest. It seemed like the world was suddenly spinning more slowly, and as gravity crushed down on me, I realised that Anya was silent for the first time in days. Frantic, I pushed past Samantha to gain entry into the room, where I saw, for the first time, the truth. The room was destroyed. Signs of a struggle were evidently everywhere I looked, and my wife was there, motionless and decaying in the tub. She was half submerged in the water, leaning back against the tub's edge. Her eyes were glazed over, and she stared at me, lifelessly. The water around her had putrefied, and she had dark marks on her throat, and her skin was swollen with liquid. Slowly, the realization dawned on me that she had been dead for days now, and I swallowed hard as I looked over my own body. The scratches on my arms, the bruises, the bite marks. She had tried to fight. The circus just appeared one day, perched in the parking lot behind the mall. Hand-painted signs cropped up overnight like gaudy weeds, displaying sneering clowns and roaring tigers. The largest circus on earth, one night only. The flyers covered the walls at school, were stuffed into every mailbox. I left tire streaks with a pile of them as Gaz and I raced to the beach. Wherever I looked, brightly coloured papers merged with the dead leaves swirling through the air, printed with a portrait of a cheerful-looking man wearing a goofy top hat. "Well, Sean, this might be your best shot," Gaz cackled as our bikes hit sand and we began to slow down. "How are your cartwheels?" I kicked some sand up at him, which only made him laugh harder. Gaz was always giggling about something. It was part of the reason we clicked so well. No one else could stand him. "Come on, imagine covering up that disaster on your head with a rainbow wig. The girls would just die," he shrieked. "Keep laughing," I told him. "I might just consider it." To be honest, I really was considering it. I had been planning, half seriously, on running away from home, and joining a circus didn't sound half bad. I was 16 at the time, bored to death by small-town living and aching to leave my parents in the dust. Did I have a plan? No. But I was fueled by Home Alone-style stories of kids making it in the city with a credit card and common sense. Plus, I could do a pretty good cartwheel. "Wow, half the school must be out here," Gaz observed, shaking me from my musings. I followed his gaze to the party happening near the water. He was right. Even in the fading light, there were a lot of faces I recognised. A few upperclassmen approached us when we got closer, hunched over like cartoon bodybuilders. "Are you two supposed to be here?" the bigger one asked. We glanced at each other. "You don't know us. That's Raygun," I gestured towards Gaz. "Club president. And this is Jazzwipe, vice club president," Gaz wheezed. "Lisa invited us." That's the other reason we clicked so well. Ever since we'd met, we'd been playing this game, coming up with the dumbest fake names we could think of whenever we met new people. Whoever's cover got blown first had to buy the other one a soda. Stupid, I know, but it had gotten me a lot of sodas too. The guys let us pass without comment, and we merged with the crowd of kids on the beach. I was surprised at how many of them were talking about the circus. Even the bro circle had supplemented their usual discussion about boobs they'd felt with talk of what kind of boobs the tightrope walker would have. You know, for balance purposes. It was very scientific. Gaz and I threw around a few more pseudonyms for fun, but most people were too drunk or preoccupied to call either of us out. Either time we saw the guys from earlier, we pretended to be looking for Lisa until they passed. I guess they were designated guards or something. At some point, I lost Gaz to the horde of swaying teens. In between songs, I could hear his stupid, shrieking laughter, which made me feel sorry for whoever he'd made his next victim. Abandoned, I peeled off a little and sat on a piece of driftwood looking over the water. It was really getting dark now, so much so that I didn't even notice the two girls that sat beside me until they spoke. "What's your name?" they said, in unison, scaring me half to death. Nickel Forward," I mumbled, looking helplessly between them. I noticed immediately that they were twins. Long strands of black hair framed identical pale faces. Too pale, like they were wearing face paint. My eyes fixated on the frilly tutus around their waist and the striped stockings that clung to their legs. "You guys go to Garfield High?" I asked. "Actually, my sister and I belong to the circus," said the one on the right. "We open tomorrow night," said the one on the left. "Oh, yeah, everyone's talking about it. We don't get a lot of excitement around here. Must suck getting stuck with promotion, right?" They looked at me strangely. Lefty spoke first. "No, we wanted to come out here. We thought a party looked like fun. It's been so long since we've hung out with kids our age." Her sister shot her a look and she shut up. Righty finished. "She means that we've been so busy. It's hard to get out much, you know. But you really should come. What did you say your name was?" I'd forgotten my alias. Classic. But just before I gave myself away, I felt a hand touch down on my shoulder. "This right here is the Great Forest Woods, no relation to Tiger," Gaz giggled. "Sorry you ladies had to deal with him. He's real broody, isn't he?" He plopped down between Lefty and me, nearly knocking her off the seat. Righty frowned, silent accusations hardening her features. "No, I thought it was something else." Her gaze burned into me. Her eyes seemed bigger than before. A foreign shame entered my bloodstream, like when your mom catches you doing something wrong. For a second, that's exactly how I felt. Like a little kid, caught in a lie. I almost told her my real name, but her sister beat me to the punch. "Anyway, it was really nice meeting you two. Hopefully we'll see you at the circus tomorrow." I watched them walk back up the beach, towards the main road. Gaz whistled a bit, then broke out in a fit of laughter. Usually the sound was mildly annoying, but the party was starting to thin, and the bonfire was being put out, and my friends' wild, high-pitched wails were more unnerving than anything else. If you told me the next Olympics were going to feature competitive shark wrestling, that would have been more believable than what my parents said at breakfast the next morning. "Have you seen the circus up by the mall, Daryl?" my mom chirped. "Yeah, me and the boys were talking about it at work yesterday. I was thinking we could go see what it was about. As a family, you know. Admission is free." That's how they were. Even though I was sitting right there, slurping up cereal, they talked like I wasn't even in the room. I cleared my throat loudly, twice. "You alright, Sean? I hope you're not getting sick." "I'm fine, Mom. And since when are you and Dad into circuses?" My real question was, since when are you and Dad into anything? They shrugged. "Looks like fun. Plus a couple of lovely girls stopped by the other night to give us flyers. They said it'd be very educational," my mom said. I tried not to choke on cereal. I tried to tell myself that they'd probably just gone door to door. It wasn't like they'd sought out my house specifically. It wasn't even possible. Still, I couldn't shake the dread that crept into my fingertips and made the spoon too heavy to lift. Did you tell them anything?" My dad scoffed. "They're not cops, Sean. We just said we'd love to come see their show. Your mother even gave them one of her famous cupcakes." "But, no buts. We're going to have a nice family evening and you're not getting out of it." The light in the kitchen seemed to die out. As if on cue, a strange flyer fluttered past the window. I watched it with a frown. At that point, I made up my mind that I was going to run away for real. And if I had to go to this thing, maybe I really could take advantage of it, even if they were just looking for someone to clean out the elephant pen. I turned back to my parents. "Can I bring Gaz?" They groaned loudly, which I took to mean yes. Through hours of hostage crisis level negotiation, it was agreed that Gaz and I would ride our bikes to the circus and meet my parents in the stands. Actually, his parents were going too, but they were more than happy to dump their son with us. Sometimes I felt kind of bad for him, to be honest, but he didn't seem to mind. On our way there, I told him about the two girls and got a similar story back from him. I was relieved. They'd gone door to door after all. I also told him my plan to skip town, which admittedly wasn't much of a plan. Really, I was just going to ask the ringmaster for a job after the show and hope for the best. Like I said, I was running on movie magic. Gaz told me my plan was stupid, and then immediately offered to help. His job was to distract my parents. He was a good friend. When we arrived, the parking lot was swarming with people. The entire town must have been there. Dead leaves and flyers chocked the air. The smell of cotton candy and popcorn replaced any oxygen, making me dizzy. Above us, the big top loomed, red and white stripes tapering into a sharp point at the top, with dozens of cheap carnival games scattered about it. A few dirty-looking clowns patrolled the games, handing fluffy toys with big, gloved hands. I tried to picture myself as one of them, and felt sick. But still, I was determined. Gaz and I parked our bikes and walked up to the ticket master. "Names," he said. "Midsummer Shyamalan," Gaz giggled. "And this is my buddy." But before he could invent a name for me, I interrupted him. "Josh Grant," I blurted out. I still don't know why I said it. I don't know why I played it safe. I just know that something deep inside me told me that I needed to be convincing. The ticketmaster nodded at me, wrote my name on a shiny ticket, and passed it through the window. Then he narrowed his eyes at my friend. "Your real name?" Gaz glared at me, then said, very slowly, "Garrison Fields." We had this rule, see, that if your cover got blown, you had to give up your real name. It was supposed to be a punishment, like giving away a piece of yourself. I think about this rule a lot. I think about this moment a lot. "You're an asshole, you know that, right?" Gaz punched me in the arm as we walked into the tent. "That doesn't count. You have to earn your soda." I just nodded, trying to shake away the fog of carnival convictions. I met up with my parents, and the show quickly began. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the largest circus on earth. Our members are very pleased to see your faces, but be advised, there will be audience participation." A troupe of clowns danced into the ring, breaking out into cruel laughter and honking their tiny horns. I guess the gag was that they were prisoners or slaves or something, because of the comically large shackles attached to the legs. Whenever the ringmaster approached them, they all made a big show of screaming and cowering behind each other. At one point, the ringmaster pulled out a whip and pretended to hit them with it. I flinched at the sound of it snapping in the air, but the audience was eating it up. Even my parents were howling with laughter, slapping their thighs as they watched. I forced a chuckle from my lips, suddenly very self-conscious. Finally, the clowns retreated and were replaced by ballet dancers. I recognised the twins among them, leading the rest of the performers. Only, not everyone was in costume. In fact, most of the dancers were dressed like suburbanites or wearing business clothes. Ages ranged from ancient to elementary schoolers, all moving together. One older woman tripped and landed face first on the floor, where she was trampled by her teammates. Gaz was doubled over in hysterics beside me. I felt sick. I kept waiting for her to get up. She looked so frail, white and withered. One of the twins looked back at her, and she finally picked herself up. She rejoined the dancing, and I tried to laugh at the way her legs bent awkwardly backwards. By the halfway point, I was rethinking my plans. Short-skirted vendors prowled the stands, offering sugary snacks. "And what's your name, cutie?" Josh Grant." A tub of cotton candy was shoved into my lap. I placed a clump of it into my mouth and almost gagged. It was stale, sour. But when I turned to complain, the vendor had already moved on. I looked around. My parents were sharing a large tub of popcorn, except they weren't really eating it. No one was really eating. Hands dug into containers and brought the contents to laughing lips, only to have them fall right out of the mouth and onto the floor. I watched the Gaz grind cotton candy into his teeth, unable to stop giggling long enough to chew. My head was light. I looked back at my own container and gasped. The pink treat was gone, replaced by a thin layer of black mud and a pile of dead leaves. I touched my fingers to my lips, and they came away black. Now I really did gag. "Dude, something's wrong." I shook Gaz by his shoulders. "I think we should ditch." But he just kept laughing, not even looking at me. "Gaz, come on, I'm being serious." Below us, a dozen or so men were eating fire, or trying to anyway. "Gaz!" I shoved him hard. His skull made a sharp thud on the wooden bench, but he just kept cackling like an idiot. Tears rolled down his face. His cheeks were red. White fingers clutched at his side, but he kept going, glued to the action. My parents were the same. Everyone was. I wanted to stand up and scream, "What's so funny?" But a cold fist formed in my stomach and kept me still, kept him quiet. The show continued. I have to be honest. It really was the largest circus on Earth. Thousands of people dragged themselves through various stunts and tricks, but it was as if they hadn't been trained on any of it. There were no costumes, no one was smiling, the magician wept as he cut a woman in half. No box or anything. "I'm sorry," he kept mouthing, and the smell of blood joined the tango of sugar and butter. I couldn't breathe, I couldn't watch, but a pair of clowns was guarding every exit. For some reason, I felt like I was being monitored. Trying to stop the wetness in my eyes, I dunked a fist into my tub of dead leaves and flung them at my mouth, allowing them to stick to my chin. I laughed at the horror in front of me until my cheeks hurt, rocked back and forth in my seat, tried to stop looking around. The smell of urine wafted up, and I noticed that the man in the seat below mine had peed himself, not that he seemed to mind. Finally, after hours, the ringmaster made an announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, it's time for audience participation." He held a box of shiny tickets. "When I call your ticket, come on down." The room went silent. I don't mean people stopped laughing, because they didn't. It was like their voices simply went quiet. "Holden Deer, Felicity Chambers, Gabby Days." I watched people suddenly jerk onto their feet, staggering towards the center stage with shaky, lurching steps. A parade of puppets. David Brown, Daryl Connors, Linda Connors. My parents stood up. I couldn't help myself. I threw my body at them, holding onto their legs like a little kid, begging them not to go. A few clowns looked in our direction, but I ignored them. Mom, Dad, please, don't you get it? Something's wrong with these people. We have to go home now. But they kicked me off with full strength. I flew back into Gaz, whose face was still contorted into silent laughter. Garrison Fields. No, please, you can't, I screamed in his ear. For the smallest fraction of a second, I swear he looked at me. I'll never forget the pain in his eyes, the fear. And then he stumbled down towards the ring. Everyone did. Josh Grant. I stood up. For a moment, the world worked in slow motion. I watched my family march through the ring. A girl, one of the twins, handed my dad a clown nose. Another one was showing my mother how to dance. Lazily, very stupidly, I noticed several pairs of twins doing the same to the rest of the crowd. Several pairs of the same twins. One handed Gaz a flaming baton. The ringmaster smiled up at me, then frowned as I stood, motionless. His eyes seemed too big, his features too sharp. That's not my name, I screeched at the top of my lungs. Then I ducked my head and ran through the stands, through the red and white curtains that felt coarse and dry against my skin, out into the parking lot, where I pounced on my bike and hurtled down the main road, screaming and crying and trying to remember how to breathe. I waited for my parents the rest of the night, uselessly of course. I waited to hear the sounds of cars starting up. I waited to hear familiar voices, all uselessly. Stacks of flyers were blown against my windows, face up. One night only, I read. I screamed to break the silence. Largest circus on earth, I read. The next morning, I pedaled back to the mall, not knowing what I was expecting. The place was deserted. No tent, no games, no ticket booth, just rows upon rows of parked cars and overturned bicycles. A thin layer of dead leaves blanketed the ground where the big top had been. I stood there for a long time, unable to comprehend the bitter irony of it all. I had planned to join the circus, but everyone else had instead. The realization slackened my knees. A wild, hysterical giggle burst from my lips. No, I mumbled between peals of laughter. No. I sank to the ground, shaking. This isn't happening. I don't know how long I stayed there, staring at the spot where everyone in my town had been taken. I don't know how long I waited for some sign of life, and I don't know when the laughter turned to sobs. What do you think's down there? Julian asked as he leaned over the open hatch. From where we were stood on the high sand berm, we could see down to the floor, but nowhere else. The interior walls were concrete and covered in graffiti all the way down the 15-foot shaft. Probably like a dead homeless guy or something, Dylan said. He laughed when he said it to prove that that kind of thing didn't scare him. There were thick metal posts sticking out from one side of the concrete where the ladder used to be, but the rungs were no longer attached. Lewis crawled over to the edge and started lowering his legs down onto the first set. Dude, what are you doing? I asked, hoping he wasn't planning to climb down there. If he did it, we'd all have to follow, and I really did not want to. He looked up at me as if my question was stupid. "Gonna go check it out. Might be something cool down there. It's obviously safe if other people climb down here to spray graffiti, right?" He replied with the perfect confidence of my best friend. It was only the second step down when he lost his footing and slipped. We three above watched through the hatch as he tumbled the rest of the 10 or so feet down, hitting the bottom with a thud. "Lewis!" I shouted, which was followed by several other calls down the tube to him. His body looked so big, crumpled in that narrow shaft. He didn't move for what felt like an hour. In my heart, I knew he was dead, and his mother would never forgive me. But he wasn't dead. I heard a groan and Lewis rolled over. There was blood. The bright sun streamed down almost directly into the hatch, and his face looked pale when he looked up at us. "Are you okay?" Julian yelled down to him. There was fear in his question, because we all knew he wasn't okay. Yeah, I think so," Lewis responded. He pushed himself into a near-sitting position. I prepared to climb down to help him. My fear of the place disappeared now that my friend was in trouble. I scanned the ladder remnants and noticed that they only went down a few steps before totally disappearing. This fact had somehow escaped Lewis when he decided to climb down. I could see all my friends coming to the same realization I just had. He wasn't going to climb out the way he'd gone down. "Maybe there's another way out," Julian suggested. But we'd been climbing all over the old missile site all morning, and this was the only hatch we found. Maybe it hadn't been covered over with tons of dirt like everything else had when it was abandoned, or maybe the wind had freed it over time. Either way, it was the sole access point. "I don't think Louis should be wandering around down there without knowing how to get out. He could get lost. Who knows how many tunnels there might be," I said. "We've got to go back to town and get a ladder or a rope or something," Dylan said, leaning back from the hatch and speaking a little quieter than before. "Maybe we should just call the fire department or something. They can get him out," I suggested. But that was immediately and roundly rejected. "Screw that. Just get something to lift me out with." Even Lewis wasn't down for the fire rescue. He sounded fine. So we decided to drive back to town. "Will one of you guys toss me down the phone before you go, so I at least have a light? My phone got smashed when I fell," he asked. None of us wanted to part with our phones, so we made a silent agreement. Rock, paper, scissors. Julian lost, and he reluctantly dropped his down the hole. "Hang tight, bro. We'll be back," he said, and we all piled into Dylan's janky Toyota and hauled ass back to town. We spent at least an hour trying to figure out a way to load Dylan's parents' ladder into his car without looking too suspicious, before we decided to just get a rope. It was mid-afternoon by the time we got back to the old missile silo. "Lewis!" Julian shouted as we neared the hatch. His lack of response was the first indication that something was wrong. But we didn't start to panic until we saw that he wasn't sitting down there at the bottom of the hole where we'd left him. "Maybe he just moved into the tunnel to get out of the sun and passed out or something. Someone will have to go down there to help him back up," Dylan suggested. Julian and I got ready for rock, paper, scissors, but Dylan didn't throw in. "It's my car we always drive around, and it's my dad's rope, so I think it's fair if one of you guys do it," he said. When I protested, he had a response. "Don't be a pussy, Juan. Just throw," he said angrily. There wasn't any point arguing, so we went without him. I lost. They helped tie the rope to my waist, and soon I was walking down the concrete wall with the help of my friends on the other end. It was noticeably cooler down there, even in the shaft of sun. It had been so bright above that it took a few long seconds for my eyes to adjust. There was a single, short and narrow hallway at the base of the hole. The light bounced off the pale concrete, and I could see about 15 feet down the hall. My friend wasn't within those 15 feet. "Lewis," I called. He didn't answer. "He's not down here," I told my friends back up at the surface. I heard them talking, but couldn't really make out the words. "He's got to be down there, dude. Just look for him. He might be hurt," Julian shouted down to me. He was right. Maybe Lewis was looking for another way out since it took us so long to get back. I flipped the light on my phone and started slowly walking. The tunnel turned a few times, but never otherwise changed. It was just a featureless, concrete-walled path. "Lewis?" I called for him as I slowly walked deeper and deeper into the underground compound. I came to a crossroads. I started marking notes into my phone so I would remember the way back, when it occurred to me that Lewis had Julian's phone. I texted the number, and sure enough, I heard the faint jingle of Julian's alert. It wasn't far. I made a left turn and walked maybe 20 feet, then texted again. I followed the path through several more curves. Around one last turn, I came upon a figure slumped against the concrete. "Lewis?" I asked, but he didn't move. I rushed to him, fearing he was dead, but to my surprise, he turned his head when I neared. He was pale and shaking. "Juan?" he asked, scanning my face for recognition. I helped him to his feet, which he took unsteadily. "Yeah, Lewis, it's me. We got a rope to get you out. Are you okay? Can you walk?" I asked him, checking his legs. He nodded and took a couple shaky steps. I led him slowly back the way I had come. "What happened? Why did you go in so far?" I asked as we walked. "I don't know. I just got lost," he said quietly. "But why did you go anywhere? We told you we were coming back for you," I scolded. His eyes shot to mine for a brief second before quickly dropping away before I could read them. "I don't know. I got confused. I was just looking for a way out," he stammered. I started to wonder if he had hit his head, and the thought urged me to move faster. My battery was at 15% when I spotted the faint glow of sunlight ahead. "Julian? Dylan?" I shouted as we neared. Suddenly, Lewis screamed and wheeled several steps back. I reached for his arm to steady him, but he yanked it away. He tumbled to the concrete and crawled backwards where he had just been. "Lewis!" I shouted, quickly overtaking him. I grabbed him tightly and gave him a quick shake. "Lewis, what are you doing?" I asked. We were back in the darker part of the tunnel, and my phone was pressed against my hand and his shoulder. But in the dim light, his face was a mask of utter terror. His eyes were wide, and his lips were curled so far away from his teeth that they disappeared. "Lewis!" I shouted and shook him again. His eyes found mine, and he seemed to calm slightly. "I can't go up there," he whispered. The intensity of his voice frightened me to the point that I actually thought I shouldn't go up there either. But that was stupid. "What are you talking about? Dylan and Julian are waiting to pull us out. Let's go. If we don't, they're probably going to call the fire department or the cops to come out here to rescue us, dude," I insisted. Lewis just shook his head, staring towards the light. "You want to have the cops to have to rescue us?" I asked him sternly. His eyes darted from the light back towards the way we had come, as if he might run back down there. "No," he whispered. "Come on, we're almost there." I pulled him gently to the hanging rope. My friends were leaning over the hatch, and they yelled down at us when they saw us. "Hurry up, you assholes! Tie off and we'll pull you up," Dylan said. "And what the hell took so long?" Julian added. Soon I was watching Lewis, rope around his waist, walk unsteadily up the wall and disappear. A minute later, we were all reunited on the surface. The sun was moving toward the west, and it felt pleasantly warm up there. "Let's get the hell out of here. My parents are going to take my keys away if I don't get back for dinner," Dylan said. So we loaded into his car, and he dropped us off in turn to our homes. Lewis insisted he didn't need to go to the hospital, and that he wasn't hurt in the fall. But that didn't seem possible. We didn't want to cause him grief, so we just let it go. I was hesitant, thinking about how he had acted when I tried to get him up the hatch, but I decided to chalk all the weirdness up to him having a bad scare. When Lewis didn't show up for class the next day, though, I got worried. I went straight to his house after school, but his mother told me he was fine, just feeling a bit sick. It was a full 2 weeks before she finally let me see him. She led me up to his room, but hesitated before opening the door. It seemed like she wanted to tell me something, but she never did. When she swung the door open, I was hit by a horrible smell. A mix of unwashed teenager and rancid food. It was dark inside. The windows were taped up with posters and random pieces of paper, and even the sheets from his bed. Lewis was sitting on his striped bed, staring off at nothing. He wasn't wearing a shirt. He looked like he had lost nearly 30 pounds, and he wasn't that big of a guy to start with. "Lewis?" I asked hesitantly. The whole scene was sort of freaking me out. "Close the door," he whispered. I looked back to where his mother was still standing. She shook her head. She wasn't about to leave us alone, and that struck me as odd. I'd been to that house 1,000 times before and hung out with Lewis in his room alone, but this was different. Something had happened. "Lewis, I have your homework. When do you think you're coming back to school?" I asked, approaching the bed. He didn't look at me. His face was terribly thin, but his skin was pulled tightly across his cheeks, like he had just enough of it left to cover his bones. There was something very wrong with my friend. "Dude, are you okay?" I took a step closer. His mother was still standing by the door, as if she was guarding him. I heard the ring of a phone and watched as she tried to decide whether to keep supervising us or to answer it. She relented and took the call, but she didn't go far. "Doctor, you have to get him in. He can't stay here. He's getting worse. He needs help." She started getting heated and took a step further into the hall when she saw me watching her. I touched Lewis's arm gently, and he looked up at me finally. His eyes were dark and sunken and painted. "It took Ma," he whispered to me. "Mariana? What are you talking about?" I asked, and it occurred to me that I hadn't seen his sister at school in a couple of days. "She's down there now, in the tunnel," he said. "Mom won't listen to me, but I know it took her. It followed me out, and now it's got my little sister," he said. His voice cracked with emotion. Lewis grabbed my hand suddenly, startling me. There was an intensity in his eyes that scared me. "Juan, you have to help me. We have to get her out of there, like you got me out," he said, drawing very close to me. "The police. We have to call the police," I said. He shook his head. "They don't believe me. Mom called them, and they said Ma probably just got mad and took off, and she'll be back. But I know where she is," he said. They all think I'm crazy, that I hit my head, but I'm not. You believe me, don't you? Lewis gripped me even tighter, as if he could force that belief into me with his hands. Lewis. I started to try to talk some sense into him, but tears began streaming down his cheeks. He was desperate. Please, Juan, you're the only other one who has been down there. We have to find her, he insisted. I thought about Lewis's younger sister. Ma was not the kind of girl who would just take off. She's a star runner on the track team and a straight-A student. She's never been in any kind of trouble and gets along with everyone. I knew she wouldn't just take off. Okay. I'll go take a look. I'll get her out if she's down there, I said, though I wasn't really planning to. Lewis shook his head. I have to go with you. I know where it took her, he said, growing more and more frantic. Where what took her? I asked, and he finally let go of my arm. He looked away. I don't know what it is, but it's down there, and it'll hurt her. I have to go. We have to go, he said, more quietly now. This time, I shook my head. Lewis, you're not going to be able to climb down there. You're barely skin and bones. You look anorexic. You have to get some rest and regain your strength. I'm worried about you, I said. I have to go. He raised his voice again, and it was taking on a pitch that was high and desperate. I was scared for my friend, but before I could respond, his mother stepped back in. You're not going anywhere, young man. Dr. Hannah's agreed to see you in an hour. You need to take a shower and get ready to leave, she ordered. I'm sorry to kick you out like this, Juan, but we have an appointment. You can come by again tomorrow if you want, she said before ushering me out. I made eye contact with Lewis one last time before she shut his bedroom door. He was scared. I walked the few blocks to my house, considering what my friend had told me. He had said something took her, but wouldn't tell me what. The more I thought about it, the more I thought there might be something to his story. Ma was gone. Of that, I was certain. She's a cute teenage girl who runs alone often. Perhaps it wasn't an it that took her, but a who. Someone could have just grabbed her off the street. Maybe that's what he saw down there in that tunnel. Some kind of kidnapper's hideout. I grabbed a long rope from the garage, a flashlight, and a few bottles of water. As I was stepping out the door, another thought occurred to me. I went back to my parents' bedroom and pulled the handgun from the nightstand. I know it was stupid, but I did it. It took some convincing, but I got Dylan to drive me back out to the missile site. Just wait here if you don't want to come down with me, I told him as we leaned over the hatch. I knew he was afraid to go down, and I didn't blame him. You really think Mara's down there? He asked me. Did you even know she was missing? I answered his question with a question. He shook his head. This whole situation was getting weirder all the time. There's something wrong with Lewis, Dylan said with perfect certainty. And I agreed. I'm just gonna check because he asked me to. Then I can tell him she's not there. She's probably just at a friend's or something, I explained. But I didn't really believe that. Fine, I'll wait for you. Just call me if you get into trouble or whatever. Don't take too long either. My parents don't want me out late, he said. I climbed down the rope into the cool tunnel and flipped on my light. The place looked just how it had before. Concrete walls, blank but for the graffiti that ends in the shaft, as if no one ever walked further into the place to paint. I started walking, taking the same turns I had taken that day with Lewis. This time, I brought a thick Sharpie and drew an arrow at each turn, pointing the way home. I know what you're thinking. I'm an idiot. That's definitely true. I should have just left this whole thing alone. But Lewis was so upset. I figured I could just take a quick look, then at least tell him she wasn't down there. I'd be giving him some amount of comfort for his missing sister. That's what I thought, at least. Unfortunately, she was down there. As I neared the last turn from where I had found Lewis, I heard a noise. Something was moving around the corner, dragging itself along the rough, concrete floor. "Ma?" I whispered. The noise continued, unchanged by my calling out to it. I rounded the turn, and my light fell on a thin figure dragging what I recognized immediately as a body. I gasped reflexively as he let go of the legs. They fell flopping to the concrete. "You got here faster than I thought you would," Lewis said as he lunged at me, knocking me down and spilling the flashlight across the floor. Even before he had lost all the weight, I had easily 30 pounds on my friend. Still, he was able to maintain control as we struggled, drawing on some kind of mad strength. We rolled around on the dirty concrete for a few seconds before I managed to get my legs up between us. I pressed my feet into his chest and launched him away. He was strong, but his body was still so light. My hand found my father's pistol and I pulled it out and cocked it. As Lewis took his feet, his attack froze at the sound. I moved a couple steps back, keeping the gun aimed at him. I grabbed the flashlight and quickly put together what was happening. He had been dragging Ma somewhere deeper down the tunnel. And she was dead. My eyes jumped from Lewis to his sister's body. She wasn't just dead. She looked horribly injured. It was like something had torn her open and some parts were missing. "What the hell?" I said. As much as I tried to keep it steady, my pistol hand shook. There was blood on Lewis. "You weren't supposed to see her. I'm sorry. I was going to make it quick for you," he said quietly. "Make it quick? You were going to kill me?" I shouted. "I have to, Juan. I'm sorry. And Mariana, I'm sorry," he wailed suddenly. Lewis dropped to his knees and pressed his hands into his face. I heard his breath gasping out as he wept. "I don't know why I did that to my sister. I just did," he cried. "It tricked me," Lewis added between hitching breaths. "What the hell are you talking about?" I demanded. "I was just so scared. It gave me something. Some kind of food down here in the dark," Lewis whispered. "What are you talking about? What food?" I wasn't following him. "But I don't think it was food. It tricked me into eating it. I was so scared and lost. Now I'm cursed. And I'm always hungry. Just like it is," he continued, disregarding my confusion. "I was supposed to bring Ma down here for it, but I couldn't. I was so hungry," Lewis said. It was starting to become clear why her body was missing parts. "Lewis, Jesus dude, what did you do? And then you. I thought I was strong enough to bring it down here to feed it. Then it would release the curse," he said shakily. "Lewis, let's get you back up. We can figure this out," I said, trying to control the situation. But I could hear the fear in my own voice. My friend just shook his head and looked over what remained of his sister. "No, I can't. I'm starving. I can't make it any further without eating," he whispered. He gave me a sideways look that I should have been able to read, but I wasn't ready for his move. My friend spun around and leapt at me, almost faster than I could compute. I pulled the trigger reflexively and kept pulling until it stopped. Lewis screamed once more, then slumped to the floor. I dropped the gun and ran to him. His breath was gurgling out the side of his chest. I rolled him over and he grunted as I did. "Thanks, bro," he said, and smiled up at me. "You have to kill it. It got me when I was vulnerable, but you're stronger than me. You can do it." "What are you talking about?" I asked him, but he didn't say anything else. His last breath bubbled out of the hole I'd shot into him, and that was it. I looked around the hallway where I sat with two dead friends and decided quickly that there was nothing else I could do, and the police would have to deal with everything. I stood, and as I turned to walk back to the hatch, I heard a sound. The tiniest whisper of breath ran across my neck. I swiped at it, spinning around and around. There was nothing there with me, but it felt like there was. "Juan, I have something special for you. Aren't you hungry?" A voice so gentle and faint, it almost wasn't a voice at all, found me down there in the dark. It was inviting, and I wanted to follow it, to see what treat it had for me. My light fell on Lewis, then on Ma, and I pressed my hand against my ears and ran. The rope was still hanging when I got to the hatch. Dylan had tied it to the top, and I climbed as quickly as I could. The air was dry and cool when I got out. Night had come while I was down there. "Dylan!" I shouted, then spotted his car. He popped out from the driver's seat and rushed to me. "Dude, what happened down there?" he asked. I spotted blood on his arm. "Lewis, he bit me," he said, still in shock. Sure enough, there was a human bite-sized chunk taken out of his arm. "Let's get the hell out of here," I said, and we did. They found Lewis's mother and her car not far from the missile site. She was dead, torn open and covered in bite marks. They haven't found Lewis yet, but they've confirmed his teeth marks on her body. The police are assuming he killed his sister as well, even though they haven't recovered her body. Lewis is on the run, could have even crossed the border already, or so they say. I told Dylan and Julian the whole thing. They didn't believe me at first, but Dylan came around pretty quickly. The bite on his arm helped him to understand. We drove out to the site for 2 days straight and filled the shaft with dirt and buried the hatch. It was hard work, but we had to do it. I was sorry to leave Lewis down there, and more sorry to leave Mariana. But it was better than letting anyone else go down there. I don't know what it is. The thing that cursed Lewis, as he said. Maybe it was just some kind of head injury or other madness. The sound of that inviting voice still comes to me though, and I don't think I'm crazy. I think it's real. Maybe it's some kind of opportunist creature we don't know about that found a nice, cool, dark spot to take up residence there in the tunnels. Or maybe it's something that has been there all along, and, like the Balrog, we dug into its deep place and let it out. Either way, we sealed it back down there. At least until the next idiots find an open hatch somewhere in the desert and dare each other to go exploring.